Blackdom was abandoned. And now we go to my favorite place. I spent a lot of time there, Afrotopia. Now, if you believe race exists, raise your hand. Y'all you still believe it, right? It is what it is, right?
I am
now,
signing books at
some of you have kind of changed your mind a little bit. Well, let's just put it like
Maybe
this.
they're just scared.
If race exists, then Afrotopia exists.
Yeah.
Okay?
All those books.
Define it, please.
That's where I'm at to define black. Can Mexicans be black? Oh, you see? Afrotopia. The Afrotopia referred to in this chapter, the first of 3 parts, begins in a state of surrealism, influenced by the omnipresence of W.E.B. Du Bois's 1903 The Souls of Black Folk. Has anyone read that? Does anyone know who W.E.B. Du Bois is, those ones who don't know? Just think of him. And a July 1920, still in the 1920s. Now remember, I was telling you that they struck oil in September, right? So we're descending in time. We're going from September to July 1920. Letter written to him, W.B. Du Bois, from Ruth Loomis Skeen, a white woman.
Yeah.
She happened to live 20 miles south of Blackdom at the start of Blackdom's transition during the Harlem Renaissance. At the time, Du Bois was the editor of the Crisis magazine, aimed at the betterment of black folks as well as an outlet for the NAACP. Blackdom, an Afrotopic paradigm, was officially platted as a town in May. September, July, May. Blackdom was a real place with a real oil company in 1920. Blackdom was a real place with a tangible means of expression that expounded on personally held notions of Afrotopia. Ontologically, Blackdomites exceeded the goals of black liberation theology as well as Ethiopianism between 1903 and 1920. On the precipice of boom times, during an age often referred to as the Roaring Twenties, Ruth Loomis Skeen's letter to Du Bois therefore functions as a testimonial of Blackdomites' successful articulation of Afrotopia, a tangible means of black expression during a period of black renaissance. Now, the story you read about Blackdom is usually a failure. I'm telling you it was a success. Who you gonna believe? I'm just gonna skip to the letter. There's a more here you can read later, but I'm gonna skip to the letter because I just told you about Ruth Loomis Skeen. Is anyone familiar with Joseph Skeen, the legislator?
Question, but I'm in the
Well, there's a
library,
building
so I
named
will
after
be
Ruth
whispering a
Loomis
little bit.
Skeen's family member. I don't know which one, but named after a family member in Roswell, which is where, anyone familiar with Roswell? Yes. Roswell is where Blackdom is. Okay, so you know there's a conspiracy about aliens, right? I have one.
You can ask a
The
question.
aliens were black people.
I'm signing books.
Ruth Loomis Skeen.
Public Library, Santa Fe Public Library.
I'm trying to Blackdomites believed in a collective spiritual and daily toil. Ruth Skeen wrote to W.E.B. Du Bois in 1920. I have greatly enjoyed the simple copies of The Crisis, and if you will send me 2 or 3 copies of The Brownie Book, a literary magazine aimed at African American children.
I will take them, and with the samples of Crisis,
and visit a colored settlement near here and endeavor to secure subscriptions for your good magazine. There are not many colored people in this part of our state, although we have many Mexicans, and the race feeling against them is rather quite bitter. They are not allowed to enter a white barbershop, nor to eat in a white man's eating place. However, in the northern part of the state, they own a good deal of property and are well educated and hold positions of trust and honor. Our governor is a Spanish American born in old Mexico. Of course, historically, the Spanish people have a perfect right here, and there are persons in the state possessing a fair attitude toward them. But they are only what English writer John Ruskin calls a little group of wise hearts in a wilderness of fools.
But they are only what English writer John Ruskin calls a little group of wise hearts in a wilderness of fools. Near here is a settlement of Negroes, a little town called, and she put it here in quotes, Blackdom, consisting of farmers who have wrenched every bit of good out of our bitter soil. They are quiet, good citizens and molest nobody. They have had little chance for the cultural things of life, and I believe they would welcome an opportunity to take your papers and magazine. Of course, they may already know about them. They have a little school and a church. At any rate, I will be glad to go over in my car and take them the books. I have lived among Negroes all of my life, have had them in my home as helpers, and known them very well, but I have never, until going to California, lived where they were not segregated. Thus, according to Luther the King, Blackdom lights appeared in full expression of Afrotopia in 1920. So, did she mention Blackdom Oil? So she was describing an Afrotopia, and they struck oil. That's it. I've just changed your life forever. Black people are significant in the history of New Mexico, which is only 100 years if you're only talking about the state of New Mexico, right? So if the state of New Mexico is 100, since it was the 1912, this is about 111. Okay. Nice. Blackdom started in 1903. By statehood, 1912, it was his own federal district with the post office, school. Oh, it also had an HBCU. The Blackdom Normal School had put out Ph.D.s in Roswell. Told you, it's like aliens, right? Never heard of that. But yes, they had a normal school. So, questions, comments, concerns, thoughts, ideas before I get it? Go for it.
Wait.
Just real quick.
The New Mexico History Museum is right over there. And when I was in there, I walked around and looked for the history of Black people in the state. Because I'm from Texas, Hookham Horns. So there's one little picture that's on the back of a post, big, of some buffalo soldiers. That's it.
Yes, we've spoken with a few people at the New Mexico Museum, but it takes money, it takes power, it takes people caring. We still believe that race exists, even though we also believe in DNA, so we can believe two things at the same time. And
well,
you're on.
okay. Yeah, I didn't hear about Black people in New Mexico before I knew of Dr. Nelson. I am white, and I'm from Colorado, and I'm ignorant, and I didn't get taught a lot about Black people. After freeing the slaves, everyone, that's where we're all peaceful, everyone just transitioned from there. Nothing happened between that point and this point, in my history lessons. And the Wikipedia on Blackdom is still incorrect, right?
Yes.
Um,
The popular notion is within, like, it's problematic for a few reasons, but the popular narrative of Blackdom literally says that it failed. Think about that. For as long as they've been telling the story of Blackdom, until now, Blackdom was a failure. And yet, it is the place where I found that they struck oil. Go ahead.
Is that the first place in New Mexico where oil was located?
No. So it's a part of the Permian Basin. It's the edge of the Permian Basin that you think about with Texas, but it's the edge, so you think in terms of Artesia. They have a refinery there, but that Permian Basin crosses over that New Mexico-Texas border.
Yeah, so it wasn't the first place.
No, I think in 1909 it was first in in Eddy County. 1909.
I have pictures of my relatives standing in front of the Blackdom School.
Really?
Yes, I do.
Wow.
From the New
Check
Mexico
that out.
Historical Society. They're standing
Check
there,
that out.
and I never saw them before. I saw that picture, and then went back into the family history.
Wow.
And I found that my grandfather had 5 brothers, 3 of which I never heard of before, and there was his kids standing. Wow.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
I love how many connections that are possible with events like these. So I appreciate that you're here today and persisted coming in today. Hopefully there's a greater connection
It
that will be
definitely
made.
is.
But especially grateful for historians like Dr. Nelson, activists like Marissa Roybal, putting in the hard work to make all our American history known. Up until now, we're all only hearing about this part of history in 2024. But you're also uplifting communities by celebrating these amazing feats, successes. That's what got squashed, I think.
Yes.
Who is telling the story, who's telling history, who's rewriting or leaving out parts of history. We can't tell about this very successful all black community. We can't tell other Black people that you can manipulate capitalism to sovereignty. You can't show them what's actually possible, that dreams came true in Blackdom. So I don't know, I'm not a historian, so I don't know exactly why we don't know about this history. But as you continue to research and continue to discover, how much of a gap in history is there?
Yes. So the gap you were describing is 1865, slavery ends, and then maybe you'll get a Martin Luther King up in there. This is Black History Month. How many of you heard something about Martin Luther King? Rosa Parks. Frank Boyer. Right? Today you got Frank Boyer.
Yes.
But there's also Black women, right? There's a 2-part series, and really the whole thing should be about Black women. Blackdom would not have existed without Black women. Even though you have men's names on this paperwork, women also put their name on paperwork too, but the Blackdom Townsite Company, because that was the end of an era and the start of a new one. Now, before I mythologize, when you were talking about Black women, you had all the way from the church lady all the way to the madam. So I'm going to tell you about the exciting one.
The church lady.
The church lady. We'll start with her first. Ella Boyer, born in Georgia, married Frank Boyer when he came back from being a Buffalo soldier. She was trained at the Lucy Laney Institute for midwives, and she is quoted as saying she brought so many children into Blackdom she could not even count them. That's the way she described it in 1947 in an article written by Catherine Henry, and it was an article with Frank. On the other side of town, the secular side, you had Mittie Moore Wilson, or was it Maddie? She had an AKA, so she had an alias because she was a madam, a bootlegger, a gunslinger, a homesteader, and one of the main contributors to the Blackdom Oil Company. She owned a whole square mile of Blackdom, and that's what she had her name on. The land that she didn't have her name on, also she included her empire as well. She had a house in Roswell, speakeasy as well, and land in Blackdom. So what kind of consciousness even comes from the secular side of Blackdom? This idea that land and sovereignty was important. Well, guess what? So she becomes Mittie Moore, and she goes from famous to infamous by 1915. Down the street, the New Mexico Supreme Court took up a case of her. She's a madam, she's a prostitute. Why does the New Mexico Supreme Court feel the need to take up a case about a madam in Roswell? Well, she brought this novel legal theory, kind of like the novel legal theory of total immunity for a president. I digress. Her version of that same novel theory of immunity was that she was a sovereign. So she pressed charges against the law, claiming the contempt of a sovereign. This is a prostitute. Can you imagine the consciousness of her understanding this novel? Where did she get this novel legal theory from? Oh, that's right, she was in Blackdom. And she, was a businesswoman. Well, Blackdom was also the home of the first black lawyer to argue in front of the Supreme Court of New Mexico, George Malone. And he had traveled all around. He was the uber literate, and she had access to that. She was able to use it in court, so that ended up there. So the gap, we would eliminate all of that, including the Harlem Renaissance, because we're going from slavery to Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks. So that gap is huge. And I try to do some helping in here. Oh, go ahead.
You say that Blackdom existed in 1920, and you're saying 10 years later it wasn't there. Can't hear.
I'll repeat.
So, what became of the people? Where did they go?
Okay, so the question, the framing was, you said that Blackdom existed in the 1920 and 1930. You said it was gone, basically, because it said it ends in 1930. So to clarify, Blackdom still exists today. Okay, remember, so if you are a property owner, but let's say you own two properties. One is in New York and the other's in Roswell. Which one will you probably spend more time with? Right? So, depending on who you are, but if you're getting royalties, you actually have land that's producing royalties so that you can live in New York how you want to. That's where the leaving happened. Well, when is the best time to be in New York? 1920. When is the best time to be in California? 1920. So they didn't technically leave because there were some people who maintained themselves as homesteaders throughout the 20th century. But the leaving or the undoing of the township, the relationship, was in the 1920s, because what you also had was a divide between the secular and the religious. Remember, the religious went to Blackdom for one thing, a regenerative agricultural society. But now there's oil being struck. It's oil. Well, now it's about extraction. Now it's about extracting from the land, not regenerative, extracting, kind of like a drug dealer. What happens when a drug dealer comes into town? You still own the property, but that property value goes down, where it's kind of hard. You know, you can poison your water when you're striking oil the way they used to in the 1920s. Long story, short version is 1920s, they begin exiting and going to other cities while owning their own land because they leased it to oil speculators.
Who owns it now?
Depends. Okay, so the families still own, like, okay, in the 1920s, the Heron family owned 2,240 acres, okay, a few miles. Today, they own 1,500 acres. Let me tell you how their land has been used and how it is being used now. In the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, the land, the Heron land that I'm describing, was used as a Nike missile silo, a site, okay? In Blackdom Commons, you also have the Roswell Correctional Center. On Heron Land also, they're pumping natural gas. It's also a station where electricity is being, see, it's still being extracted from 100 years later. It's just black folks ain't getting none of the money.
So, okay, I just have a quick question. This may be a little off topic with your subject matter, but my question is